We often look at the soft glow of a light bulb and see a flash of divine inspiration, a singular moment where genius struck Thomas Edison like a bolt of lightning. But this is the great illusion of talent. We worship the result because it is beautiful, but we ignore the grime, the frustration, and the thousands of dead ends that paved the way to that single glowing success. Edison was not born a wizard. He was branded a failure before he even began. In a crowded Ohio schoolroom, his teachers looked at his wandering gaze and his struggle to follow traditional lessons and labeled him addled, slow, confused, and fundamentally broken. They saw a lack of talent where there was actually a surplus of curiosity that the system couldn't contain. When the world closes its doors, the stoic mind builds its own house. His mother, recognizing the fire beneath the addled exterior, pulled him from the schoolhouse to teach him at home. This was the first lesson in internal agency, that your worth is not defined by the consensus of the crowd, but by the relentless pursuit of your own internal light. Edison's deafness began in childhood, a physical silence that most would consider a crippling blow. Yet, in a display of radical perception, he reframed this loss as his greatest asset. He viewed the silence not as a void, but as a sanctuary. It allowed him to tune out the world's trivial noise and focus with a density that the hearing could never achieve.
To Edison, genius was a commodity that could be manufactured through sheer, unyielding volume. If one man could test 100 ideas, then 10 men could test 1,000. He didn't wait for the muse to strike. He cornered her in a room and refused to let go.
Edison became a tramp telegrapher, a wandering spirit of the industrial age. He moved from city to city, carrying little more than his curiosity and a fierce independence. This was his true apprenticeship, a stoic journey through the underbelly of a burgeoning, electric America.
He worked the graveyard shifts, those lonely hours where the soul is tested by fatigue and silence. While his colleagues slept, Edison disassembled the machines, mapping the flow of electrons. He didn't just want to send the message, he wanted to master the medium that carried it. His deafness forced him to develop a unique tactile style of listening. He would often press his teeth against the wooden casing of the receiver to feel the vibrations in his jaw. This was the birth of his obsession with the physical manifestation of sound and energy.
Failure, to the telegrapher, was simply a broken circuit. You trace the wire, find the gap, and bridge it. Edison applied this mechanical stoicism to his entire life. A failed experiment wasn't a tragedy. It was merely a circuit that required a different, more resilient connection.
The telegrapher's will is a relentless pursuit of clarity. Edison sought to squeeze more information through the wire, eventually inventing the duplex and quadruplex systems. He refused to accept the inherent limitations of technology, seeing every constraint as a personal challenge from the universe. Even his heart spoke in code. He would later teach his wife Morse code so they could speak privately in crowded rooms, tapping messages onto each other's skin. Love, like light, was simply another form of communication to be mastered through secret, rhythmic, and intentional pulses. There is a profound stillness in the heart of the storm. As a young man, Edison learned that the external world is chaotic and unpredictable, but the mind is a laboratory where one can forge order out of the static of everyday existence through sheer force of will. He pursued inspiration not with a delicate hand, but with a relentless club. The 20-hour workdays began here, in the dim light of various telegraph stations. He learned to outlast his fatigue, believing that the spirit is far more resilient than the flesh it inhabits. The telegraph office was the precursor to the Invention Factory. It taught him that innovation is a collaborative effort between man and machine. He began to see himself not as a mere laborer of the keys, but as a conductor of the world's hidden, silent forces. The telegrapher's will was the foundation of the wizard's legend. It was the realization that grit, focus, and a refusal to be distracted by the noise of the world could illuminate the darkness. He was no longer just a man. He was an engine of progress.
We often look at the soft glow of a light bulb and see a flash of divine inspiration, a singular moment where genius struck Thomas Edison like a bolt of lightning. But this is the great illusion of talent. We worship the result because it is beautiful, but we ignore the grime, the frustration, and the thousands of dead ends that paved the way to that single glowing success. Edison was not born a wizard. He was branded a failure before he even began. In a crowded Ohio schoolroom, his teachers looked at his wandering gaze and his struggle to follow traditional lessons and labeled him addled, slow, confused, and fundamentally broken. They saw a lack of talent where there was actually a surplus of curiosity that the system couldn't contain. When the world closes its doors, the stoic mind builds its own house. His mother, recognizing the fire beneath the addled exterior, pulled him from the schoolhouse to teach him at home. This was the first lesson in internal agency, that your worth is not defined by the consensus of the crowd, but by the relentless pursuit of your own internal light. Edison's deafness began in childhood, a physical silence that most would consider a crippling blow. Yet, in a display of radical perception, he reframed this loss as his greatest asset. He viewed the silence not as a void, but as a sanctuary. It allowed him to tune out the world's trivial noise and focus with a density that the hearing could never achieve.
To Edison, genius was a commodity that could be manufactured through sheer, unyielding volume. If one man could test 100 ideas, then 10 men could test 1,000. He didn't wait for the muse to strike. He cornered her in a room and refused to let go. Edison became a tramp telegrapher, a wandering spirit of the industrial age. He moved from city to city, carrying little more than his curiosity and a fierce independence. This was his true apprenticeship, a stoic journey through the underbelly of a burgeoning electric America. He worked the graveyard shifts, those lonely hours where the soul is tested by fatigue and silence. While his colleagues slept, Edison disassembled the machines, mapping the flow of electrons. He didn't just want to send the message, he wanted to master the medium that carried it. His deafness forced him to develop a unique tactile style of listening. He would often press his teeth against the wooden casing of the receiver to feel the vibrations in his jaw. This was the birth of his obsession with the physical manifestation of sound and energy.
Failure, to the telegrapher, was simply a broken circuit. You trace the wire, find the gap, and bridge it. Edison applied this mechanical stoicism to his entire life. A failed experiment wasn't a tragedy. It was merely a circuit that required a different, more resilient connection.
The telegrapher's will is a relentless pursuit of clarity. Edison sought to squeeze more information through the wire, eventually inventing the duplex and quadruplex systems. He refused to accept the inherent limitations of technology, seeing every constraint as a personal challenge from the universe. Even his heart spoke in code. He would later teach his wife Morse code so they could speak privately in crowded rooms, tapping messages onto each other's skin. Love, like light, was simply another form of communication to be mastered through secret, rhythmic, and intentional pulses. There is a profound stillness in the heart of the storm. As a young man, Edison learned that the external world is chaotic and unpredictable, but the mind is a laboratory where one can forge order out of the static of everyday existence through sheer force of will. He pursued inspiration not with a delicate hand, but with a relentless club. The 20-hour workdays began here, in the dim light of various telegraph stations. He learned to outlast his fatigue, believing that the spirit is far more resilient than the flesh it inhabits. The telegraph office was the precursor to the Invention Factory. It taught him that innovation is a collaborative effort between man and machine. He began to see himself not as a mere laborer of the keys, but as a conductor of the world's hidden, silent forces. The telegrapher's will was the foundation of the wizard's legend. It was the realization that grit, focus, and a refusal to be distracted by the noise of the world could illuminate the darkness. He was no longer just a man. He was an engine of progress.
We often look at the soft glow of a light bulb and see a flash of divine inspiration, a singular moment where genius struck Thomas Edison like a bolt of lightning. But this is the great illusion of talent. We worship the result because it is beautiful, but we ignore the grime, the frustration, and the thousands of dead ends that paved the way to that single glowing success. Edison was not born a wizard. He was branded a failure before he even began. In a crowded Ohio schoolroom, his teachers looked at his wandering gaze and his struggle to follow traditional lessons and labeled him addled, slow, confused, and fundamentally broken. They saw a lack of talent where there was actually a surplus of curiosity that the system couldn't contain. When the world closes its doors, the stoic mind builds its own house. His mother, recognizing the fire beneath the addled exterior, pulled him from the schoolhouse to teach him at home. This was the first lesson in internal agency, that your worth is not defined by the consensus of the crowd, but by the relentless pursuit of your own internal light. Edison's deafness began in childhood, a physical silence that most would consider a crippling blow. Yet, in a display of radical perception, he reframed this loss as his greatest asset. He viewed the silence not as a void, but as a sanctuary. It allowed him to tune out the world's trivial noise and focus with a density that the hearing could never achieve.
To Edison, genius was a commodity that could be manufactured through sheer, unyielding volume. If one man could test 100 ideas, then 10 men could test 1,000. He didn't wait for the muse to strike. He cornered her in a room and refused to let go.
Edison became a tramp telegrapher, a wandering spirit of the industrial age. He moved from city to city, carrying little more than his curiosity and a fierce independence. This was his true apprenticeship, a stoic journey through the underbelly of a burgeoning electric America.
He worked the graveyard shifts, those lonely hours where the soul is tested by fatigue and silence. While his colleagues slept, Edison disassembled the machines, mapping the flow of electrons. He didn't just want to send the message, he wanted to master the medium that carried it. His deafness forced him to develop a unique tactile style of listening. He would often press his teeth against the wooden casing of the receiver to feel the vibrations in his jaw. This was the birth of his obsession with the physical manifestation of sound and energy.
Failure, to the telegrapher, was simply a broken circuit. You trace the wire, find the gap, and bridge it. Edison applied this mechanical stoicism to his entire life. A failed experiment wasn't a tragedy. It was merely a circuit that required a different, more resilient connection.
The telegrapher's will is a relentless pursuit of clarity. Edison sought to squeeze more information through the wire, eventually inventing the duplex and quadruplex systems. He refused to accept the inherent limitations of technology, seeing every constraint as a personal challenge from the universe. Even his heart spoke in code. He would later teach his wife Morse code so they could speak privately in crowded rooms, tapping messages onto each other's skin. Love, like light, was simply another form of communication to be mastered through secret, rhythmic, and intentional pulses. There is a profound stillness in the heart of the storm. As a young man, Edison learned that the external world is chaotic and unpredictable, but the mind is a laboratory where one can forge order out of the static of everyday existence through sheer force of will. He pursued inspiration not with a delicate hand, but with a relentless club. The 20-hour workdays began here, in the dim light of various telegraph stations. He learned to outlast his fatigue, believing that the spirit is far more resilient than the flesh it inhabits. The telegraph office was the precursor to the Invention Factory. It taught him that innovation is a collaborative effort between man and machine. He began to see himself not as a mere laborer of the keys, but as a conductor of the world's hidden, silent forces. The telegrapher's will was the foundation of the wizard's legend. It was the realization that grit, focus, and a refusal to be distracted by the noise of the world could illuminate the darkness. He was no longer just a man. He was an engine of progress.
We often look at the soft glow of a light bulb and see a flash of divine inspiration, a singular moment where genius struck Thomas Edison like a bolt of lightning. But this is the great illusion of talent. We worship the result because it is beautiful, but we ignore the grime, the frustration, and the thousands of dead ends that paved the way to that single glowing success. Edison was not born a wizard. He was branded a failure before he even began. In a crowded Ohio schoolroom, his teachers looked at his wandering gaze and his struggle to follow traditional lessons and labeled him addled, slow, confused, and fundamentally broken. They saw a lack of talent where there was actually a surplus of curiosity that the system couldn't contain. When the world closes its doors, the stoic mind builds its own house. His mother, recognizing the fire beneath the addled exterior, pulled him from the schoolhouse to teach him at home. This was the first lesson in internal agency, that your worth is not defined by the consensus of the crowd, but by the relentless pursuit of your own internal light. Edison's deafness began in childhood, a physical silence that most would consider a crippling blow. Yet, in a display of radical perception, he reframed this loss as his greatest asset. He viewed the silence not as a void, but as a sanctuary. It allowed him to tune out the world's trivial noise and focus with a density that the hearing could never achieve.
To Edison, genius was a commodity that could be manufactured through sheer, unyielding volume. If one man could test 100 ideas, then 10 men could test 1,000. He didn't wait for the muse to strike. He cornered her in a room and refused to let go.
Edison became a tramp telegrapher, a wandering spirit of the industrial age. He moved from city to city, carrying little more than his curiosity and a fierce independence. This was his true apprenticeship, a stoic journey through the underbelly of a burgeoning electric America.
He worked the graveyard shifts, those lonely hours where the soul is tested by fatigue and silence. While his colleagues slept, Edison disassembled the machines, mapping the flow of electrons. He didn't just want to send the message, he wanted to master the medium that carried it. His deafness forced him to develop a unique tactile style of listening. He would often press his teeth against the wooden casing of the receiver to feel the vibrations in his jaw. This was the birth of his obsession with the physical manifestation of sound and energy.
Failure, to the telegrapher, was simply a broken circuit. You trace the wire, find the gap, and bridge it. Edison applied this mechanical stoicism to his entire life. A failed experiment wasn't a tragedy. It was merely a circuit that required a different, more resilient connection.
The telegrapher's will is a relentless pursuit of clarity. Edison sought to squeeze more information through the wire, eventually inventing the duplex and quadruplex systems. He refused to accept the inherent limitations of technology, seeing every constraint as a personal challenge from the universe. Even his heart spoke in code. He would later teach his wife Morse code so they could speak privately in crowded rooms, tapping messages onto each other's skin. Love, like light, was simply another form of communication to be mastered through secret, rhythmic, and intentional pulses. There is a profound stillness in the heart of the storm. As a young man, Edison learned that the external world is chaotic and unpredictable, but the mind is a laboratory where one can forge order out of the static of everyday existence through sheer force of will. He pursued inspiration not with a delicate hand, but with a relentless club. The 20-hour workdays began here, in the dim light of various telegraph stations. He learned to outlast his fatigue, believing that the spirit is far more resilient than the flesh it inhabits. The telegraph office was the precursor to the Invention Factory. It taught him that innovation is a collaborative effort between man and machine. He began to see himself not as a mere laborer of the keys, but as a conductor of the world's hidden, silent forces. The telegrapher's will was the foundation of the wizard's legend. It was the realization that grit, focus, and a refusal to be distracted by the noise of the world could illuminate the darkness. He was no longer just a man. He was an engine of progress.
We often look at the soft glow of a light bulb and see a flash of divine inspiration, a singular moment where genius struck Thomas Edison like a bolt of lightning. But this is the great illusion of talent. We worship the result because it is beautiful, but we ignore the grime, the frustration, and the thousands of dead ends that paved the way to that single glowing success. Edison was not born a wizard. He was branded a failure before he even began. In a crowded Ohio schoolroom, his teachers looked at his wandering gaze and his struggle to follow traditional lessons and labeled him addled, slow, confused, and fundamentally broken. They saw a lack of talent where there was actually a surplus of curiosity that the system couldn't contain. When the world closes its doors, the stoic mind builds its own house. His mother, recognizing the fire beneath the addled exterior, pulled him from the schoolhouse to teach him at home. This was the first lesson in internal agency, that your worth is not defined by the consensus of the crowd, but by the relentless pursuit of your own internal light. Edison's deafness began in childhood, a physical silence that most would consider a crippling blow. Yet, in a display of radical perception, he reframed this loss as his greatest asset. He viewed the silence not as a void, but as a sanctuary. It allowed him to tune out the world's trivial noise and focus with a density that the hearing could never achieve.
To Edison, genius was a commodity that could be manufactured through sheer, unyielding volume. If one man could test 100 ideas, then 10 men could test 1,000. He didn't wait for the muse to strike. He cornered her in a room and refused to let go.
Edison became a tramp telegrapher, a wandering spirit of the industrial age. He moved from city to city, carrying little more than his curiosity and a fierce independence. This was his true apprenticeship, a stoic journey through the underbelly of a burgeoning, electric America.
He worked the graveyard shifts, those lonely hours where the soul is tested by fatigue and silence. While his colleagues slept, Edison disassembled the machines, mapping the flow of electrons. He didn't just want to send the message, he wanted to master the medium that carried it. His deafness forced him to develop a unique tactile style of listening. He would often press his teeth against the wooden casing of the receiver to feel the vibrations in his jaw. This was the birth of his obsession with the physical manifestation of sound and energy.
Failure, to the telegrapher, was simply a broken circuit. You trace the wire, find the gap, and bridge it. Edison applied this mechanical stoicism to his entire life. A failed experiment wasn't a tragedy. It was merely a circuit that required a different, more resilient connection.
The telegrapher's will is a relentless pursuit of clarity. Edison sought to squeeze more information through the wire, eventually inventing the duplex and quadruplex systems. He refused to accept the inherent limitations of technology, seeing every constraint as a personal challenge from the universe. Even his heart spoke in code. He would later teach his wife Morse code so they could speak privately in crowded rooms, tapping messages onto each other's skin. Love, like light, was simply another form of communication to be mastered through secret, rhythmic, and intentional pulses. There is a profound stillness in the heart of the storm. As a young man, Edison learned that the external world is chaotic and unpredictable, but the mind is a laboratory where one can forge order out of the static of everyday existence through sheer force of will. He pursued inspiration not with a delicate hand, but with a relentless club. The 20-hour workdays began here, in the dim light of various telegraph stations. He learned to outlast his fatigue, believing that the spirit is far more resilient than the flesh it inhabits. The telegraph office was the precursor to the Invention Factory. It taught him that innovation is a collaborative effort between man and machine. He began to see himself not as a mere laborer of the keys, but as a conductor of the world's hidden, silent forces. The telegrapher's will was the foundation of the wizard's legend. It was the realization that grit, focus, and a refusal to be distracted by the noise of the world could illuminate the darkness. He was no longer just a man. He was an engine of progress.
We often look at the soft glow of a light bulb and see a flash of divine inspiration, a singular moment where genius struck Thomas Edison like a bolt of lightning. But this is the great illusion of talent. We worship the result because it is beautiful, but we ignore the grime, the frustration, and the thousands of dead ends that paved the way to that single glowing success. Edison was not born a wizard. He was branded a failure before he even began. In a crowded Ohio schoolroom, his teachers looked at his wandering gaze and his struggle to follow traditional lessons and labeled him addled, slow, confused, and fundamentally broken. They saw a lack of talent where there was actually a surplus of curiosity that the system couldn't contain. When the world closes its doors, the stoic mind builds its own house. His mother, recognizing the fire beneath the addled exterior, pulled him from the schoolhouse to teach him at home. This was the first lesson in internal agency, that your worth is not defined by the consensus of the crowd, but by the relentless pursuit of your own internal light. Edison's deafness began in childhood, a physical silence that most would consider a crippling blow. Yet, in a display of radical perception, he reframed this loss as his greatest asset. He viewed the silence not as a void, but as a sanctuary. It allowed him to tune out the world's trivial noise and focus with a density that the hearing could never achieve.
To Edison, genius was a commodity that could be manufactured through sheer, unyielding volume. If one man could test 100 ideas, then 10 men could test 1,000. He didn't wait for the muse to strike. He cornered her in a room and refused to let go.
Edison became a tramp telegrapher, a wandering spirit of the industrial age. He moved from city to city, carrying little more than his curiosity and a fierce independence. This was his true apprenticeship, a stoic journey through the underbelly of a burgeoning, electric America.
He worked the graveyard shifts, those lonely hours where the soul is tested by fatigue and silence. While his colleagues slept, Edison disassembled the machines, mapping the flow of electrons. He didn't just want to send the message, he wanted to master the medium that carried it. His deafness forced him to develop a unique tactile style of listening. He would often press his teeth against the wooden casing of the receiver to feel the vibrations in his jaw. This was the birth of his obsession with the physical manifestation of sound and energy.
Failure, to the telegrapher, was simply a broken circuit. You trace the wire, find the gap, and bridge it. Edison applied this mechanical stoicism to his entire life. A failed experiment wasn't a tragedy. It was merely a circuit that required a different, more resilient connection.
The telegrapher's will is a relentless pursuit of clarity. Edison sought to squeeze more information through the wire, eventually inventing the duplex and quadruplex systems. He refused to accept the inherent limitations of technology, seeing every constraint as a personal challenge from the universe. Even his heart spoke in code. He would later teach his wife Morse code so they could speak privately in crowded rooms, tapping messages onto each other's skin. Love, like light, was simply another form of communication to be mastered through secret, rhythmic, and intentional pulses. There is a profound stillness in the heart of the storm. As a young man, Edison learned that the external world is chaotic and unpredictable, but the mind is a laboratory where one can forge order out of the static of everyday existence through sheer force of will. He pursued inspiration not with a delicate hand, but with a relentless club. The 20-hour workdays began here, in the dim light of various colograph stations. He learned to outlast his fatigue, believing that the spirit is far more resilient than the flesh it inhabits. The telegraph office was the precursor to the Invention Factory. It taught him that innovation is a collaborative effort between man and machine. He began to see himself not as a mere laborer of the keys, but as a conductor of the world's hidden, silent forces. The telegrapher's will was the foundation of the wizard's legend. It was the realization that grit, focus, and a refusal to be distracted by the noise of the world could illuminate the darkness. He was no longer just a man. He was an engine of progress.
We often look at the soft glow of a light bulb and see a flash of divine inspiration, a singular moment where genius struck Thomas Edison like a bolt of lightning. But this is the great illusion of talent. We worship the result because it is beautiful, but we ignore the grime, the frustration, and the thousands of dead ends that paved the way to that single glowing success. Edison was not born a wizard. He was branded a failure before he even began. In a crowded Ohio schoolroom, his teachers looked at his wandering gaze and his struggle to follow traditional lessons and labeled him addled, slow, confused, and fundamentally broken. They saw a lack of talent where there was actually a surplus of curiosity that the system couldn't contain. When the world closes its doors, the stoic mind builds its own house. His mother, recognizing the fire beneath the addled exterior, pulled him from the schoolhouse to teach him at home. This was the first lesson in internal agency, that your worth is not defined by the consensus of the crowd, but by the relentless pursuit of your own internal light. Edison's deafness began in childhood, a physical silence that most would consider a crippling blow. Yet, in a display of radical perception, he reframed this loss as his greatest asset. He viewed the silence not as a void, but as a sanctuary. It allowed him to tune out the world's trivial noise and focus with a density that the hearing could never achieve.
To Edison, genius was a commodity that could be manufactured through sheer, unyielding volume. If one man could test 100 ideas, then 10 men could test 1,000. He didn't wait for the muse to strike. He cornered her in a room and refused to let go.
Edison became a tramp telegrapher, a wandering spirit of the industrial age. He moved from city to city, carrying little more than his curiosity and a fierce independence. This was his true apprenticeship, a stoic journey through the underbelly of a burgeoning, electric America.
He worked the graveyard shifts, those lonely hours where the soul is tested by fatigue and silence. While his colleagues slept, Edison disassembled the machines, mapping the flow of electrons. He didn't just want to send the message, he wanted to master the medium that carried it. His deafness forced him to develop a unique tactile style of listening. He would often press his teeth against the wooden casing of the receiver to feel the vibrations in his jaw. This was the birth of his obsession with the physical manifestation of sound and energy.
Failure, to the telegrapher, was simply a broken circuit. You trace the wire, find the gap, and bridge it. Edison applied this mechanical stoicism to his entire life. A failed experiment wasn't a tragedy. It was merely a circuit that required a different, more resilient connection.
The telegrapher's will is a relentless pursuit of clarity. Edison sought to squeeze more information through the wire, eventually inventing the duplex and quadruplex systems. He refused to accept the inherent limitations of technology, seeing every constraint as a personal challenge from the universe. Even his heart spoke in code. He would later teach his wife Morse code so they could speak privately in crowded rooms, tapping messages onto each other's skin. Love, like light, was simply another form of communication to be mastered through secret, rhythmic, and intentional pulses. There is a profound stillness in the heart of the storm. As a young man, Edison learned that the external world is chaotic and unpredictable, but the mind is a laboratory where one can forge order out of the static of everyday existence through sheer force of will. He pursued inspiration not with a delicate hand, but with a relentless club. The 20-hour workdays began here, in the dim light of various colograph stations. He learned to outlast his fatigue, believing that the spirit is far more resilient than the flesh it inhabits. The telegraph office was the precursor to the Invention Factory. It taught him that innovation is a collaborative effort between man and machine. He began to see himself not as a mere laborer of the keys, but as a conductor of the world's hidden, silent forces. The telegrapher's will was the foundation of the wizard's legend. It was the realization that grit, focus, and a refusal to be distracted by the noise of the world could illuminate the darkness. He was no longer just a man. He was an engine of progress.
We often look at the soft glow of a light bulb and see a flash of divine inspiration, a singular moment where genius struck Thomas Edison like a bolt of lightning. But this is the great illusion of talent. We worship the result because it is beautiful, but we ignore the grime, the frustration, and the thousands of dead ends that paved the way to that single glowing success. Edison was not born a wizard. He was branded a failure before he even began. In a crowded Ohio schoolroom, his teachers looked at his wandering gaze and his struggle to follow traditional lessons and labeled him addled, slow, confused, and fundamentally broken. They saw a lack of talent where there was actually a surplus of curiosity that the system couldn't contain. When the world closes its doors, the stoic mind builds its own house. His mother, recognizing the fire beneath the addled exterior, pulled him from the schoolhouse to teach him at home. This was the first lesson in internal agency, that your worth is not defined by the consensus of the crowd, but by the relentless pursuit of your own internal light. Edison's deafness began in childhood, a physical silence that most would consider a crippling blow. Yet, in a display of radical perception, he reframed this loss as his greatest asset. He viewed the silence not as a void, but as a sanctuary. It allowed him to tune out the world's trivial noise and focus with a density that the hearing could never achieve.
To Edison, genius was a commodity that could be manufactured through sheer, unyielding volume. If one man could test 100 ideas, then 10 men could test 1,000. He didn't wait for the muse to strike. He cornered her in a room and refused to let go.
Edison became a tramp telegrapher, a wandering spirit of the industrial age. He moved from city to city, carrying little more than his curiosity and a fierce independence. This was his true apprenticeship, a stoic journey through the underbelly of a burgeoning, electric America.
He worked the graveyard shifts, those lonely hours where the soul is tested by fatigue and silence. While his colleagues slept, Edison disassembled the machines, mapping the flow of electrons. He didn't just want to send the message, he wanted to master the medium that carried it. His deafness forced him to develop a unique tactile style of listening. He would often press his teeth against the wooden casing of the receiver to feel the vibrations in his jaw. This was the birth of his obsession with the physical manifestation of sound and energy.
Failure, to the telegrapher, was simply a broken circuit. You trace the wire, find the gap, and bridge it. Edison applied this mechanical stoicism to his entire life. A failed experiment wasn't a tragedy. It was merely a circuit that required a different, more resilient connection.
The telegrapher's will is a relentless pursuit of clarity. Edison sought to squeeze more information through the wire, eventually inventing the duplex and quadruplex systems. He refused to accept the inherent limitations of technology, seeing every constraint as a personal challenge from the universe. Even his heart spoke in code. He would later teach his wife Morse code so they could speak privately in crowded rooms, tapping messages onto each other's skin. Love, like light, was simply another form of communication to be mastered through secret, rhythmic, and intentional pulses. There is a profound stillness in the heart of the storm. As a young man, Edison learned that the external world is chaotic and unpredictable, but the mind is a laboratory where one can forge order out of the static of everyday existence through sheer force of will. He pursued inspiration not with a delicate hand, but with a relentless club. The 20-hour workdays began here, in the dim light of various colograph stations. He learned to outlast his fatigue, believing that the spirit is far more resilient than the flesh it inhabits. The telegraph office was the precursor to the Invention Factory. It taught him that innovation is a collaborative effort between man and machine. He began to see himself not as a mere laborer of the keys, but as a conductor of the world's hidden, silent forces. The telegrapher's will was the foundation of the wizard's legend. It was the realization that grit, focus, and a refusal to be distracted by the noise of the world could illuminate the darkness. He was no longer just a man. He was an engine of progress.